So I want you to imagine spending like 3 whole years of your life learning ancient Greek.
Oh man, that is a lot of flashcards.
Right. You're memorizing centuries of theological debate. You're writing these flawless academic papers. And you are top of your class.
The absolute peak of the academic mountain.
Yeah. But then you step up to this wooden podium on a Sunday morning, you look out at a crowd of eager faces, and within 15 minutes, you've put half the room to sleep.
Which is just the worst feeling in the world.
It really is.
Yeah.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. We are so thrilled you decided to join us for this deep dive today, and we are looking directly at you.
Yeah, whether you lead a weekly corporate meeting or, maybe teach a classroom full of students.
Or even if you're just intensely curious about how communication actually works when the stakes are, well, incredibly high.
Because that scenario you just described, it happens every single week across the globe.
100%.
There is this massive gap between acquiring all that academic knowledge and actually transferring it to a living, breathing audience.
So today, we are investigating Appendix 3 of a really fascinating book. It's called The Archer and the Arrow by Phillip Jensen and Paul Grimmond.
Yeah, and specifically, we're looking at 7 practical tips for young preachers. These were originally published in a magazine called The Briefing way back in December of 2001.
So right off the bat, we need to define a term that will anchor this entire conversation today.
Right, because the authors are writing specifically about expository preaching.
Yeah. And for you listening, if that is a new term, expository preaching is a style of public speaking where, well, the main point of the biblical text becomes the main point of the sermon.
Right, the speaker isn't just picking a random topic that sounds fun.
No. Not at all.
Yeah.
They aren't just finding a few Bible verses to back up their own personal opinion. Instead, they open up a specific passage, explain what it means in its original context, and then apply that meaning to the people sitting right in front of them today.
It is a rigorous, a really demanding style of communication.
It is.
It demands an exceptional level of skill, and the source text establishes a clear baseline for what we are looking at. Experienced speakers are constantly fielding questions from beginners about this stuff.
Like logistical questions, right?
Yeah, the rookies are always asking things like, should I be speaking longer or shorter? Or do I bring a full written manuscript up there, or do I just use a few bullet points on a notepad?
And Jensen and Grimmond clarify that these 7 tips, they aren't some rigid, exhaustive program you have to memorize.
No, they are field-tested, practical ideas. They're designed to bridge that intimidating gap between the seminary classroom and the Sunday pulpit.
So let's frame this whole conversation around a character. We'll call them the eager novice.
Oh, I like that. We've all been the eager novice at some point.
Right. So I want you, the listener, to picture this person. They are fresh out of a rigorous training program. Their head is just stuffed with theory. They have read hundreds of books, their adrenaline is pumping, and they genuinely want to do a good job.
But tomorrow morning, they face a live audience for the very first time.
Yeah. How do they translate all that abstract head knowledge into engaging instruction?
It's tough.
That tension brings us to the first tip in the text, which deals with the sheer weight of the task and, well, what I call the trap of good enough. Tip number 1 says, when you preach, be as good as you can.
Which, that might sound like a generic motivational poster in a high school hallway.
Yeah, hang in there.
Right. But the authors ground it in a massive theological reality. They argue that preaching is the central reason the church gathers in the first place.
It's not just a warm-up act for the music.
No, and it isn't a simple community announcements bulletin either. It is the speaking of God's word for the salvation of souls and the building up of the church.
That is heavy.
It is.
Okay.
Because the stakes are literally life and death in a spiritual sense, the text argues it warrants maximum effort every single time a person steps behind a microphone.
Man, that is a staggering weight to put on a 25-year-old kid fresh out of school.
Total.
But here is where the text introduces a really fascinating concept about audience behavior. The authors point out that if a congregation is already used to solid expository preaching, they will actually tolerate occasional boredom from the speaker.
Yeah, they tolerate a bad delivery because they trust the Bible itself.
Right. They know the source material is flawless, even if the delivery system is, well, flawed that day.
The authors refer to this as a built-in grace from a mature congregation.
Built-in grace. I like that.
The audience essentially says, we know this specific sermon is a bit dry today, but we love the scriptures, so we will hang in there and do the hard work of listening.
I want to push back on this premise, though, just a bit.
Go for it.
If I am the eager novice, right, and I know my audience has this massive reservoir of grace and patience, doesn't that breed, like, severe laziness?
Oh, I see where you're going.
Let's say I'm managing a highly loyal sports team fan base. The fans love the team so much they will buy tickets even if we have a terrible season.
Right, they show up no matter what.
Yeah. So if I know they will buy the tickets regardless, why should I spend the money to draft better players? If a speaker knows the crowd will forgive a boring sermon, why should they stay up until midnight on Saturday refining their delivery?
That is the exact temptation the authors are warning against. They explicitly address that mindset.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, the tolerance of a mature congregation is never an excuse to slack off. You cannot weaponize the goodwill of your audience to cover your own laziness.
Wow, weaponizing goodwill.
Yeah.
That's a sharp way to put it.
If you do that, you are betraying the weight of the task we just talked about. And the text also contrasts that comfortable scenario with a totally different situation.
What happens when there is no built-in grace?
Precisely. Imagine stepping in front of a crowd that is used to a completely different style of speaking.
Like what?
Well, maybe they are used to highly emotional theatrical speeches or, topical talks that bounce rapidly from subject to subject just to keep them entertained.
Okay, yeah, like a TED Talk kind of vibe.
Right. If you are stepping in front of that specific crowd to introduce rigorous verse-by-verse exposition, the text argues your delivery must be exceptionally sharp.
You can't rely on them doing the heavy lifting.
No, you have to prove the value of the method through the sheer quality of your work. You do not have an existing bank of audience trust to draw from. You have to earn every single minute of their attention.
That makes perfect sense. If you are introducing a difficult new format, you just cannot afford to be boring.
Not for a second.
But that leads us directly into a rather harsh reality check for our eager novice. Because the reality is, folks fresh out of training are usually terrible at holding an audience's attention.
Very true.
Which brings us to the second tip, and this dilemma of heavy versus light material.
Tip 2 is stated with brutal honesty. It just says, fledgling preachers tend to be boring.
Just flat out.
Flat out. Jensen and Grimmond argue that if a student emerges from a theological college and is not boring, they probably did not actually learn anything during their studies.
Is it really? That's a bold claim.
Yeah, because their minds are currently crammed with heavy theology, obscure original language phrases, and academic debates. They have spent years learning how to analyze data, not how to captivate a room.
Okay, wait, I have to play devil's advocate here. Shouldn't years of higher education make you a more engaging speaker?
You would hope so.
You have acquired all this incredible knowledge. You should be thrilling to listen to. Why does the text assume education equals boredom?
Because the academic environment rewards you for showing your work. A professor wants to see that you know the technical terms, that you can parse the Greek verbs, and that you understand the historical debates.
Right, the professor is grading your methodology.
But a Sunday morning audience needs synthesis and application. When a novice stands up, they often bring the academic environment with them. They want to prove to the congregation that they earned their degree.
So they dump all their technical research onto the podium.
Yes.
It is like someone trying to build a house, but instead of using their tools to actually frame the walls, they just dump a raw toolbox onto the dining room table.
Oh, that's a perfect image.
They stand there pointing and saying, "Look at my expensive hammer. Look at this shiny new wrench. Look at this ancient Greek phrase I found."
Yeah, they are showing off the tools rather than applying them to construct a shelter for the people sitting in front of them.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. The audience is sitting there in the rain, asking for a roof over their heads, and the novice is giving a lecture on the metallurgical properties of the hammer.
That is a brilliant way to picture it, and the text outlines a very specific timeline regarding this phase.
How long do you get to be the guy with the hammer?
While being boring on day one is normal, it is an expected part of the growth process. You are just learning how to translate the classroom into the real world.
Okay, that's somewhat comforting.
However, the authors drop a serious warning. If you are still boring 5 years out of college, you have a massive problem.
5 years. That's the cutoff.
By year 5, you should have figured out how to use the tools to actually build the house.
So the 5-year clock is ticking. But here's the part of tip 2 that I found totally counterintuitive when I was reading it.
Which part?
The authors have a really strong preference for a novice starting heavy rather than starting light.
Ah, yes.
They argue it is better to come out of college preaching dense theological material rather than coming out and trying to be light, funny, and, highly accessible right away.
Yeah, they push for the heavy start.
I need you to defend this. Because if a rookie preaches incredibly heavy theology, aren't they going to completely alienate the single mother in the third row who just needs some practical encouragement to get through her week?
It's definitely a risk.
Doesn't starting heavy guarantee you lose the crowd immediately?
It is a risk, but the authors are looking at long-term survival in public speaking.
Long-term survival.
Okay. If a novice decides to start light, meaning they rely entirely on their natural charisma, easy jokes, and shallow life advice, they might hold the audience's attention for the first 6 months.
Sure. People like a good joke.
But in 5 years, they will have absolutely nothing left to say. They will have emptied their shallow bucket. They will be forced to recycle the same 3 jokes and the same basic life advice every single Sunday.
So the heavy material is a survival mechanism.
Spot on. That heavy start, all those dense theological concepts, it gives the speaker a massive, deep reservoir to draw from over the course of a lifetime.
That makes a lot of sense when you put it like that.
The strategy is to possess a deep well of substance and then spend the next 5 years learning how to draw from that well and serve it to the congregation in an accessible way.
You can always learn how to present heavy material more engagingly over time.
Yes. You can learn vocal inflection, pacing, and storytelling. But if you have no substance to begin with, no amount of vocal training or eye contact will save you when you have to speak to the same group of people 50 weeks a year.
Yeah, you cannot teach an empty bucket how to pour water.
Precisely.
Okay, so our novice has survived the first 5 years by leaning on heavy theology. But there is a fatal flaw in relying on dense material, right?
Oh, absolutely.
If you misjudge the crowd's stamina, that deep theology becomes a sedative. How does a rookie know when to, well, just shut up?
Yeah, this moves us into tip number 3. The clock, the crowd, and knowing your limits.
Tip 3.
The third tip provides a very practical directive. It says, work out how long you can preach for and still be interesting.
It sounds incredibly simple.
It sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest things for any public speaker to gauge accurately from behind a microphone.
Why is that, though? Why do speakers lose track of time so easily up there?
Well, I think about the psychology of it.
Yeah. When you are up there, your adrenaline is rushing, your heart rate is elevated, you are in a flow state, hopefully.
Hopefully, yes.
In that biological condition, 45 minutes can feel like 10 minutes. Meanwhile, the audience's heart rate is resting. They're sitting perfectly still in comfortable chairs. For them, 45 minutes feels like an hour and a half.
The biological disconnect is totally real, and there's also an ego component to it.
Ego. How so?
The novice looks around and sees highly successful, famous speakers holding a crowd's attention for 50 minutes online. The human tendency is to mimic success.
Oh, if the famous guy does 50 minutes, I have to do 50 minutes.
Exactly. The rookie assumes if I want to be a great speaker, I must speak for 50 minutes. They completely ignore the fact that the famous speaker has 20 years of experience learning how to read a room, modulate their voice, and structure a long narrative.
So the novice tries to run a marathon without training, and the audience suffers the consequences.
Yeah, the audience hits the wall at mile 3.
So how does the eager novice actually figure out their specific time limit? Because you cannot rely on your internal clock.
No, your internal clock is broken by adrenaline.
And you certainly cannot rely on polite church culture either.
Oh, definitely not.
If you stand at the back doors after a service and shake hands, every single person is going to say, "Nice message today, Pastor." They're not going to look you in the eye and say, "You lost me at minute 22 and I spent the rest of the time thinking about my grocery list."
Finding honest feedback in a polite culture is a massive challenge. So the text offers a very specific solution.
What's the fix?
The absolute necessity of identifying trusted, blunt people in the congregation.
Ah, the blunt people.
You need them. You need to pull someone aside, someone who loves you and supports the church, and give them permission to be ruthless.
Give them a license to critique.
Yes. You need them to say, look, by the 35-minute mark today, the room went dead. People were checking their watches. You lost us.
Ouch, that stings. But once you get that feedback, what do you actually do with it?
The authors are strict here. If your trusted advisor tells you your current limit is 35 minutes, you must do the job in 35 minutes.
Hard stop.
Hard stop. You have to edit yourself ruthlessly to fit within the boundaries of your current skill level.
So you cut the extra illustration.
You cut it, you drop the third subpoint. You respect the audience's stamina above your own desire to share everything you learned that week.
But the authors do offer a really crucial caveat here, which shows they understand human nature.
Yes, they show a lot of pastoral sensibility in this section. While you must listen to feedback, you cannot let a single harsh comment dictate your entire career trajectory.
Because there's always that one guy.
Right. They warn against a scenario where a very blunt, maybe slightly grumpy parishioner comes up to you after your very first sermon and says, "That was awful, keep it to 10 minutes from here on out."
And if you listen to just that guy,
If the novice listens to that one critical voice, they will lock themselves into a 10-minute box for the rest of their life.
yeah, that would stunt your growth completely.
You have to take the feedback, adjust, but continuously stretch your muscles. As you get better, you can gradually extend your time.
Okay, so we have the novice trying to figure out their timing, dealing with adrenaline, and begging for honest feedback. But let's look at the preparation phase for a second.
Sure.
What makes a sermon dull in the first place? Like, why does the audience tune out at minute 35?
That's a great question.
Often, it is because the speaker spent their entire week arguing with books instead of preparing for the actual living, breathing people sitting in the pews.
Which brings us to tip number 4.
The commentator crap. And the question of who you are actually talking to.
The 4th tip advises young speakers to know how to use commentaries. Now, for the listener who might not be familiar with the term, a commentary is an academic reference book written by a scholar.
They're usually very thick books.
Very thick. It goes verse by verse through a specific book of the Bible, explaining the historical context, dissecting the original Greek or Hebrew syntax, and addressing various theological debates.
Okay, so a heavy reference tool.
The authors of our source material acknowledge that these are essential tools for preparation, but they issue a stark warning. Commentaries can be deadening for preachers.
I love that word, deadening. It perfectly captures the feeling.
It really does.
When I read this section, I immediately thought about Wikipedia edit wars.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Have you ever looked at the talk page behind a controversial Wikipedia article?
Oh yeah, it gets wild in there.
You will find 5 highly educated users furiously debating the placement of a comma in a historical document, or arguing over a citation from 1994.
Just absolute chaos over grammar.
It is highly technical, it requires a massive amount of specialized knowledge, but it is completely disconnected from daily life. If you stood up and read that edit war all loud to a room full of people, they would fall asleep instantly.
That analogy is highly accurate. And imagine the speaker getting up and reading the actual IP addresses of the people fighting in the edit war.
Right. User 4592 argues.
That is exactly what quoting 3 dead German theologians sounds like to a teenager sitting in the pew.
Let's break down the mechanics of this trap. I want you to explain the source's distinction here, because they draw a very hard line between what they call the commentator's questions and the questions of the person in the pew.
This raises a critical point about audience awareness. Scholars who write commentaries are usually writing for other academic scholars.
They aren't writing for the teenager in the pew.
No, they are engaged in high-level disputes, trying to prove a point to appear at a rival university. They are answering questions like, did a first-century scribe make a transcription error in this specific aorist passive verb tense?
Very niche stuff.
Or, does this sentence structure imply Pauline authorship, or is it a later addition? Those are commentator questions.
And what does the person in the pew want to know?
The person sitting in the pew on Sunday morning is asking, how do I forgive my brother who betrayed me?
Yeah.
Or, how do I handle the crushing anxiety I feel about my finances? Or, where is God in the middle of my terrible grief?
Real heavy human problems.
The academic questions regarding syntax and historical authorship are entirely irrelevant to the immediate visceral needs of the Sunday morning audience. Furthermore, the text points out that even the best commentators often get sidetracked by historical trivia that the biblical text itself isn't actually trying to highlight.
So the rookie spends all week reading the theological equivalent of a Wikipedia edit war, gets up on Sunday, and summarizes the debate between 2 scholars from the 1800s. Okay.
Meanwhile, the single mother in the 3rd row is just desperate for some practical hope to survive the week. It is a massive, tragic mismatch of communication.
It really is tragic when you put it like that.
What is the practical mechanism the authors suggest to avoid this deadening trap?
The advice is highly practical. Close the commentaries, open the biblical text directly, and think for yourself.
Just look at the raw text.
Yes. Do not let scholarly problem-solving consume all of your preparation time during the week. Read the passage and ask yourself what it is actually saying to a normal human being.
That seems like a solid filter.
And even more importantly, do not let those academic debates consume the congregation's valuable time during the actual delivery of the message.
Knowing the technical answers is fine for your own background knowledge, right? You
Yeah.
need to know the foundation is solid.
Right, you do the technical work in the study to ensure you are accurately understanding the passage, but that work should remain in the study.
Keep it in the office. It should not be the substance of the sermon. Your job is to translate the ancient text for the modern listener, not mediate a debate between scholars. You serve the meal. You do not invite the congregation into the kitchen to watch you chop onions and argue with the sous chef.
Oh, that's a great image. Serve the meal, don't show the kitchen. So, the novice puts the reference books aside. They look at the text directly. But the moment a speaker does that, they immediately face a structural problem.
What's the problem?
Well, they open up a book of the Bible, and they had to figure out how to divide it up into manageable pieces for a weekly presentation.
Ah, yes.
Do I read one sentence? Do I read an entire chapter? Do I just flip open the book, point my finger, and go?
That's a classic rookie move.
Right. This takes us to the mechanics of preparation. Specifically, tip number 5, finding the logic units.
Tip 5 dictates that a speaker must find the logic units of the book rather than arbitrarily preaching on chapter divisions or paragraph breaks.
Because the chapters were added later anyway, right?
Yeah.
Yes, centuries later. The authors argue that the Bible itself must determine the sermon structure. You cannot force a predetermined template onto the text.
We need to explain the mechanics of this, because it sounds great in theory, but how does a listener actually do this? What are the markers of a logic unit? How does one identify where a thought begins and ends?
Finding a logic unit requires paying close attention to the genre of the literature and the transitional words used by the original author.
Give me an example.
For example, if you are reading an epistle, a letter written by the Apostle Paul, like the Book of Romans, you are reading a highly structured, logical argument.
Very dense logic.
You look for conjunctions and transitional words like therefore, for, because, or so that. When Paul says therefore, he's concluding the previous thought and starting an application based on that thought.
Right. Therefore, based on everything I just said.
Exactly. The logic unit might be 4 verses, or it might be 12 verses, depending on how long it takes him to complete the argument.
Give me a contrasting example. Where does that method not work?
The authors use the book of Proverbs as a perfect contrast.
Oh, Proverbs is tricky.
Proverbs is a collection of short, sometimes entirely disconnected wisdom sayings. The text argues that Proverbs is simply not suited to a standard logical exposition where you read 15 verses in a row, because the logic does not flow that way.
They don't build on each other.
No. A chapter in Proverbs might cover the topic of wealth in verse 1, farming practices in verse 2, and raising children in verse 3. There is no overarching logical argument connecting those 3 verses. They are separate aphorisms.
So if you tried to preach all 3 of those verses in one sermon, you would just be giving 3 separate, disconnected mini-speeches.
Spot on. You would confuse the audience. Conversely, the authors note that a single verse like Justin 3.16 contains such a complete, logically whole thought that you could legitimately preach an entire sermon on it alone.
Because it's a self-contained idea.
Yes. The key is understanding the inherent structure of the material you are holding in your hands. You have to let the original author dictate the boundaries of your presentation.
Okay, so finding the logic unit is the goal. But this leads directly into tip number 6, where the authors give a very strong recommendation for beginners regarding the size of those units.
Yes, tip 6.
They advise beginners to stick to large chunks of scripture. I really want to push back on this idea because I think there's a huge allure to the micro-focus for a novice.
Oh, the microfocus is very tempting.
There is a real temptation to take a single sentence or even a single word and speak on it for an hour. It makes you sound incredibly smart.
It does.
You can spin out all these philosophical thoughts from one tiny phrase. It feels very deep.
Yeah.
Why do the authors warn so strongly against that microfocus?
To answer that, we have to do a dive into the philosophy of human bias and introduce 2 critical terms: exegesis and eisegesis.
Okay, let's unpack those. I hear those thrown around a lot.
Exegesis, spelled with an EX, literally means to draw the meaning out of the text. You look at the words, the grammar, and the historical context, and you extract what the original author intended to say.
That is the whole goal of expository preaching.
Right. Now, eisegesis, spelled with an EIS, is the exact opposite. It means reading your own meaning into the text.
Ah, so you start with an idea and make the text fit it.
Yes, you approach the passage with a predetermined agenda, a personal opinion, or a political view, and you force the text to support your idea.
Human nature practically guarantees we will drift toward eisegesis, doesn't it?
Oh, it is our default setting.
We all want the Bible to agree with what we already believe. We want an ancient authority to validate our modern opinions. Let me give a stark example of this.
I'd love to hear it.
You see athletes do this all the time with a famous verse, Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Oh, yes, very famous.
The athlete uses that verse to say, God is going to give me the strength to win this football game today. They read their desire for victory into the text.
It's on eye black, on shoes.
Everywhere. But if you practice exegesis and read the surrounding context, the author, Paul, is actually talking about enduring starvation, poverty, and imprisonment while remaining content.
Yes, the text is about suffering, not winning a trophy.
That is a flawless example of eisegesis, right?
100%. The athlete took a microchunk, a single sentence, and stripped it of its surrounding logic unit.
They ripped it right out of the paragraph.
When you isolate a small phrase, you create a massive vacuum of context. And human psychology dictates that you will fill that vacuum with your own assumptions.
So how does sticking to large chunks protect the novice from this trap?
Taking large slabs of scripture acts as a safeguard against our own bias. It protects both the young preacher and the congregation.
How does it protect them?
Well, when the passage read is 20 verses long, the context becomes undeniable. The congregation hears the Bible speaking for itself.
So if the novice tries to twist verse 5,
Right. If they twist verse 5 to support a personal agenda, the audience will instinctively look at verse 4 and verse 6 and realize the speaker is distorting the meaning.
the large chunk keeps the speaker honest.
It forces honesty. The authors argue that preaching correctly on just one or two verses actually requires an immense amount of knowledge and restraint.
You really have to know what you're doing to preach one verse safely.
To do it without falling into eisegesis, you have to know the surrounding chapters so well that you don't inadvertently twist the single verse out of shape. You have to hold the entire book's theology in your mind while focusing on a single phrase.
Yes, expert level stuff.
The authors conclude that only as a speaker grows and learns more over many years can they legitimately preach full sermons on short verses safely. Until you reach that level of mastery, stick to the large chunks. Let the broad context do the heavy lifting.
Okay, let's step back and look at the whole picture for a second. Our eager novice has been on quite a ride today.
They've learned a lot.
If they're doing all this correctly, if they're managing the weight of the task, pushing through the boring phase by building a reservoir of heavy material, ruthlessly watching the clock.
Ignoring the academic trivia in the commentaries.
Right. And finding the natural logic units and sticking to large chunks of text to avoid pushing their own agenda, they are practicing pure expository preaching.
They are doing the hard work of letting the text speak.
But according to the final tip in our source material, bringing this highly specific, rigorous style to a new audience requires severe relational strategy.
It's not just an academic exercise.
No, you cannot just drop this methodology on a church and expect them to applaud.
Yeah.
This brings us to section 7, winning the right battles and the necessity of pastoral love. Tip number 7 says, expository preaching is worth fighting for, but a lot of other things are not.
This tip moves us from the mechanics of study into the messy reality of human relationships.
I read this tip and immediately thought about moving into a shared house with new roommates.
Okay, lay that out for me.
Let's say you move in and you want these people to like you and trust you. You do not walk in on day 1 and rearrange all the common furniture.
That would be a terrible idea.
You do not throw out their favorite beat-up couch just because you think your leather armchair looks better. You have to live with them first. You have to earn the right to suggest changes. How do the authors apply this kind of social strategy to a church environment?
The strategy detailed in the text for introducing expository preaching to a resistant congregation is brilliant in its simplicity. Let's say the novice arrives at a church that is used to short, topical, highly entertaining talks.
And the novice wants to pivot them to 35-minute verse-by-verse exposition.
The mandate is clear. Establish the priority of teaching the Bible, but go easy on absolutely everything else.
Choose your battles carefully.
Very carefully. Do not change things you do not have to change. If the congregation loves a certain style of music, leave the music alone.
Do not fight the worship leader.
Exactly. If they like the Sunday service to start at a specific time, leave the time alone. Do not wage war over the color of the carpet, the structure of the announcements, or the type of coffee served in the lobby.
Keep the coffee the same.
You only have a limited amount of relational capital as a new leader. Save all your capital for the one thing that actually matters: clearly teaching the biblical text.
If you fight them on the carpet color, they won't listen to your sermon anyway.
Right, but there is an emotional core to this argument that goes far beyond just strategic management or polite social skills.
Yeah, the authors don't just say, be polite to your roommates.
No, they demand something much deeper. They highlight a fundamental relational prerequisite. You must love the congregation, and they must learn to love you.
This is where the academic exercise becomes a pastoral calling.
You cannot just be an intellectual robot dispensing data from a stage. You have to live your life with these people.
What does that actually look like in practice, though?
It looks like sacrifice. It means visiting the sick in the hospital on a Tuesday afternoon. It means weeping with families at funerals. It means celebrating with young couples at their weddings.
Answering phone calls in the middle of the night.
Yes. The text makes an explicit, powerful promise here. If the congregation knows you genuinely love them and care for their well-being, they will be much more willing to accept your leadership when you stand up to preach the Bible.
Trust is the bridge that the truth walks across.
Oh, that is a phenomenal way to put it. Trust is the bridge. They will trust the heavy, rigorous 35-minute exposition because they trust the character of the person delivering it.
They know the speaker isn't just trying to show off their Greek vocabulary.
Right. They know the speaker is feeding them because the speaker loves them.
That brings us to the perfect synthesis of everything we have unpacked today. It brings the listener right back to the overarching theme of this source material.
It ties it all together nicely.
These 7 tips from Jensen and Grimmond are not just a mechanical checklist for public speaking. They are a holistic philosophy of communication. They seamlessly combine rigorous intellectual fidelity to the text with an immense beating heart of practical empathy for the audience.
It requires a delicate balance of the head and the heart.
You watch the clock because you respect the audience's physical stamina. You spare them the academic debates of the commentaries because you know they are dealing with real-life pain and they need immediate hope.
You stick to large logic units because you refuse to manipulate the text to fit your own ego.
You love the people, and so you give them the clearest, most faithful explanation of the text you possibly can without any added distractions.
It demands the highest academic rigor behind the scenes in the study and the highest relational warmth in public.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to break the fourth wall for a second and leave you, the listener, with a closing question to consider as you go about your week.
A little homework.
Yeah, I want you to think about the speakers, the teachers, the managers, or the political leaders that you listen to regularly. Whether it is a Sunday morning sermon, a corporate board meeting, a university lecture hall, or even the news media you consume on your phone.
Apply this standard to all of them.
Ask yourself, are they feeding you clear, logical, contextual slabs of the subject matter? Or are they getting bogged down in academic trivia to sound smart? Are they showing off their raw tools instead of building a house?
That's a great grid to view things through.
And most dangerously, are they isolating micro-quotes and taking things out of context to slip their own personal agendas into the mix? I challenge you to demand expository clarity in all the information you consume. Look for leaders who respect your time, respect the context of the information, and genuinely care about your growth. Demand the substance, but always watch out for the ego.
We need more exposition and less eisegesis in every field of communication, honestly.
We really do. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive on reform thinking. We hope this conversation helps you evaluate not just how others speak, but how you communicate your own ideas in your own life, whether to a stadium of people or just across a dinner table.
Because clear, effective communication always starts with putting the material and the audience first.
Until next time.